The rain was coming down harder than it had all week, turning the highway into a river of black asphalt and blinding red taillights. It was the kind of night where sensible people were already home, dry and eating dinner, but for one man driving his old pickup truck, the day was far from over. He was tired. His back ached from a long week of work, and the only thing on his mind was getting home, taking a hot shower, and sleeping for 12 hours straight. The windshield wipers were fighting a losing battle against the downpour, squeaking loudly with every swipe, which only added to his headache. As he rounded a curve, his headlights cut through the darkness and revealed a scene that made him sigh heavily. Parked halfway on the muddy shoulder of the road was a small sedan, its hazard lights flashing weakly through the mist. The car looked pathetic sitting there, tilted slightly to one side. Standing next to it was a woman, soaked to the bone, trying to wave a flashlight at the passing traffic. Most cars just zoomed by, spraying water up onto the curb, ignoring her completely. The driver of the truck hesitated. He really just wanted to go home. He was cold, he was hungry, and stopping on a dangerous highway in the rain was not his idea of a fun time. But as he got closer, he saw the look on the woman's face. She wasn't just wet, she looked terrified. She looked like she had reached the end of her rope and didn't know what to do next. He couldn't just drive past and leave her there. It wasn't in his nature. He checked his mirrors, signaled despite the emptiness of the road. He slowly pulled his truck onto the gravel shoulder in front of her car. He put on his hazard lights and grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight from the glove box. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the door open and stepped out into the cold, wet air. The wind instantly chilled him, and the water seeped into his boots, making him wish he had worn thicker socks. He slammed the door shut and walked back toward the woman. She shrank back a little as he approached, clutching her purse tight to her chest. It was a sad reality of the world that a woman alone at night had to be afraid of a stranger stopping to help, even one who looked like a tired guy in a work truck. He stopped a few feet away to give her space, holding his hands up open and empty. "I saw you were stuck," he yelled over the sound of the rain. "I've got a jack in the back." "Flat tire?" The woman looked at him, then at his truck, and the tension in her shoulders dropped just a little. She nodded, her teeth chattering. "Yes, I hit a pothole, and the tire just blew. I don't know how to change it. iPhone is almost dead, and I can't get a tow truck to come out for hours." "Don't worry about it," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "It's a quick fix. Why don't you hop back in your car where it's dry? Turn on your heat and lock the doors. I'll take care of it out here." She looked relieved, almost on the verge of tears. "Are you sure? You're already getting soaked." "I'm sure," he said, forcing a smile. "Go on, I'll be done in 20 minutes. She didn't argue. She quickly opened her door, jumped in, and locked it behind her. The man turned back to his truck. He walked to the bed, unlocked the tailgate, and dragged out his heavy floor jack. It was rusted and covered in oil, but it was reliable just like him. He grabbed a lug wrench and a tarp, and trudged through the mud to the woman's car. The ground was soft and slippery, and his boots sank into the mud with every step. He laid the tarp down to give his knees some protection, and knelt beside the ruined tire. It was shredded, rubber hanging off in strips. It was a mess. He positioned the jack under the car frame, cranking the handle slowly. The rain dripped off, the brim of his hat and down his neck, running under his collar. His clothes were sticking to him. His hands were already going numb from the cold air. He gritted his teeth and focused on the work. Loosening lug nuts that have been tightened by a machine at a shop is never easy, especially in the rain. He had to put his whole body weight into the wrench, using the force of his legs to break them free. One by one, they came loose. He jacked the car up until the shredded tire was spinning freely in the air. Then came the worst part, taking the UHE. Dirty, wet tire off, and wrestling the heavy spare out of the trunk. He went to the woman's window and knocked. She rolled it down a crack. "Need the key for the trunk?" he said. She handed it over, looking at him with wide eyes. "Thank you so much," she whispered. "We're not done yet," he joked, trying to keep the mood light. He unlocked the trunk and groaned as he lifted the spare tire out. It was heavier than it looked, and the wet metal was slippery. But he managed to get it onto the wheel studs, a task that required patience and steady hands. He had to line up the holes perfectly, which is difficult when your hands are shaking from the cold. Once it was on, he spun the lug nuts back on by hand first to make sure the threads weren't stripped, then tightened them down with the wrench. He lowered the jack carefully, watching the car settle back onto the new tire. Then he went around, one last time, putting all his weight into the wrench to make sure the nuts were as tight as he could get them. He didn't want this tire coming loose while she was driving down the highway. Finally, he stood up. His back popped, and his knees were covered in mud. He was soaked through to his skin, water dripping from his nose. He gathered his tools, threw the ruined flat tire into her trunk, and slammed it shut. He wiped his greasy hands on an old rag he kept in his pocket. He walked to her window and tapped on the glass again. She rolled it all the way down this time. She looked warm now, safe inside her car, while he stood out in the storm. "Okay, you're all set," he said. "The spare should hold up just fine. Just get it to a shop tomorrow or the next day to get a real replacement. Don't drive on it too long at high speeds, okay?" She looked at him, her face full of gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "I have cash in my purse. Please, let me pay you for your time." He shook his head immediately. "Nope, not happening." "But you're out here in the freezing rain getting dirty for a stranger," she insisted, reaching for her purse. "Please, I insist." "Really? Keep your money," he said, backing away from the car. "I was just passing by. It wasn't any trouble. Just get home safe and dry. That's payment enough." "You were a good person," she said softly. "Just drive careful," he said. She nodded, put the car in gear, and slowly merged back onto the highway. He watched her taillights disappear into the distance, making sure she stayed on the road. Once she was gone, he let out a long breath, shivering as the wind hit his wet clothes. He walked back to his truck, threw his tools in the back, and climbed into the driver's seat. The inside of the truck felt cold, but it was a sanctuary from the wind. He sat there for a moment, wringing out his hat onto the floor mat. He felt tired, his muscles ached, and he was covered in grease and mud, but as he pulled back onto the road, he felt a strange warmth in his chest. It wasn't the heater, it was the feeling of knowing that for a few minutes. It had made a terrible night a little bit better for someone else. He turned up the radio, hummed along to a classic rock song, and headed home, telling all about the encounter within minutes. It was just a flat tire after all. Just a random act of kindness in a world that usually didn't stop for anything. He had no idea that this small, insignificant moment was about to change his entire life. The sun came out the next morning, drying up the puddles from the night before, but the air still had that crisp, bite-to-it chill that signaled autumn was settling in. When the man first woke up, he groaned as he swung his legs out of bed. His body was reminding him of the work he had done in the rain. His lower back felt like it was tied in a tight knot, and his knees popped loudly when he stood up. He walked like an old man to the bathroom, shivering as the cold floorboards hit his feet. It took a long, hot shower and a strong cup of coffee just to get his limbs moving properly again. He looked at himself in the mirror as he brushed his teeth. He looked tired. The dark circles under his eyes were a testament to the long hours he had been keeping lately. But despite the aches, he felt a strange sense of lightness. Helping the woman the night before hadn't fixed his own problems, but it had given him a small boost of morale. It felt good to be useful, to not just be another car driving past someone in trouble. Once he was dressed in his usual work clothes, thick jeans, a t-shirt, and a flannel overshirt, he grabbed his keys and headed out the door. The world was moving fast, just like it always did. People were rushing to get to work, buses were rumbling down the street, the noise of the city was already humming at a high volume. He got into his truck and started the engine. It sputtered a bit before roaring to life. The sound familiar and comforting. His first stop was the same diner he went to every morning. It was a small place with sticky tables and the best coffee in town. The waitress knew him by sight and already had his order pouring by the time he sat on the stool. He didn't talk much to anyone, just sat there reading the news on his phone and sipping the hot liquid. The events of the previous night felt like a dream now, blurry memory of rain and flashing lights. He didn't even know the woman's name. She was just a face in the rain, someone who had needed a hand and was now gone. He assumed she was safe at home, probably telling her family about the crazy guy who changed her tire in a storm. After breakfast, he emerged onto the highway, heading toward the hardware store where he worked. The traffic was heavier than usual, a line of cars bumper to bumper inching forward. He didn't mind the slowdown. It gave him time to think. He turned the radio down and watched the world go by. He thought about his bills, the repairs his own truck needed, and the groceries he had to buy later. It was the same loop of thoughts that ran through his head every single day. The worry was a constant companion, sitting in the passenger seat of his life. As he drove, he noticed a black SUV in the lane next to him. It was a nice vehicle, sleek and shiny, looking completely out of place among the rusty sedans and work trucks. He admired it for a second, noting how clean the windows were. It must be nice, he thought, to drive something like that. To not have to worry about every bump and pothole scraping the bottom of your car. The highway curved, and the SUV sped up a little, moving ahead of him. He didn't give it a second thought. He was too busy watching the brake lights in front of him. When he finally took his exit ramp, the traffic cleared up. He turned onto the main road that led to the industrial park, where the hardware store was located. This road was quieter, lined with trees and empty warehouses. He stopped at a red light, the only car waiting. He tapped his thumb on the steering wheel, listening to the end of a song on the radio. That was when he noticed the black SUV again in his rearview mirror. It had come off the exit behind him. He watched it approach. It slowed down and stopped directly behind his truck. Something about it caught his attention. Maybe it was because the road was so empty, or maybe it was just the way the vehicle seemed to be looming over his small pickup. He looked in the mirror again. The windows were tinted very dark, so he couldn't see who was driving. It was just a big black box reflecting his own anxious face back at him. The light turned green. He accelerated slowly. The SUV followed. It didn't speed up to pass him, and it didn't fall behind. It stayed right there, a few car lengths back. He turned on his blinker to make a right turn toward the store. Even though going straight would have been the faster way to the main entrance, he wanted to see if the SUV was actually going the same way, or if it was just a coincidence. He held his breath as he made the turn. A moment later, the SUV put on its blinker and turned right behind him. Okay, he thought. Just a coincidence. There are only so many roads in this town. He drove a bit further, his eyes darting between the road ahead and the rearview mirror. The SUV was still there. It was keeping perfect pace, matching his speed exactly. If he slowed down, it slowed down. If he sped up, it sped up. A prickle of sweat broke out on the back of his neck. Despite the cool air coming from the truck's vent, he decided to test it again. There was a small side street coming up on the left that led to a dead end near the river. It was a route nobody ever took unless they lived there or were dumping something illegal. He waited until the last second, then sharply turned his wheel and gunned the engine. His tires screeched slightly on the pavement. He jerked the truck onto the side street and looked in the mirror. The SUV didn't hesitate. It swerved smoothly across the opposite lane and followed him onto the narrow street. His heart kicked into high gear, thumping hard against his ribs. This wasn't a coincidence anymore. Nobody followed a random pickup truck down a dead-end road by accident. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, his knuckles turned white. His mind started racing with possibilities. Was it road rage? Had he cut someone off earlier without realizing it? Was it a police car unmarked? No, he told himself. Cops don't follow you this far without turning on their lights. The road narrowed, and the trees closed in, blocking out the morning sun. The shadows grew long and dark. He drove faster now, wanting to get to the end of the street so he could turn around and confront whoever was behind him, or at least get back to a main road where there were people. The SUV stayed right on his tail, its engine purring loudly, echoing off the brick walls of the old warehouses. It felt predatory. He felt like a mouse being cornered by a cat. He looked at his phone on the passenger seat. Should he call 911? What would he say? A car is following me? They would tell him to drive to the police station, but he didn't know where the nearest one was from here. Panic started to mix with anger. He hadn't done anything wrong. He was just a guy trying to get to work. He thought about the woman with the flat tire again, wishing he was back in that rain instead of here. The rain was simple. This was complicated and scary. He reached the end of the street and swung his truck around in a wide, dusty circle. The SUV followed suit, cutting the turn tight and blocking the road behind him. There was nowhere left to go. He had to stop. He slammed on his brakes and put the truck in park. Leaving the engine running, the SUV pulled up about 10 feet away and stopped. The silence was heavy, broken only by the ticking of his cooling engine and the low hum of the SUV's motor. The man sat there, staring into the black windshield, waiting for something to happen. He reached under his seat and pulled out a heavy metal flashlight, the same one he had used the night before. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it made him feel a little bit better. He watched, his breath coming in short gasps as the driver's side door of the SUV slowly opened. The door of the black SUV swung open slowly, and the man in the truck felt his entire body go tense. He gripped the heavy flashlight in his hand until his fingers hurt, ready to defend himself if he had to. He watched a polished leather shoe step out onto the dirty pavement, followed by the rest of the man. It wasn't a masked attacker or a road rage driver. It was a guy in a sharp gray suit. He looked like he belonged in a high-rise office building, not on a dead-end industrial street. The driver closed his door and paused for a second, smoothing his tie. Then another door opened, and a second man stepped out from the passenger side. This one was larger, built like a brick wall, with a suit that looked like it was struggling to contain his muscles. He didn't smile. He just stood there with his hands clasped in front of him, looking intimidating but professional. The man in the truck didn't relax. He knew better than to judge a book by its cover. Just because they were wearing suits didn't mean they weren't dangerous. He kept his window rolled up, his thumb hovering over the button to lock the doors, even though they were already locked. He watched the driver walk toward him. The guy didn't have a weapon in his hand, but he moved with a strange calmness that was almost more unsettling than someone shouting. The driver stopped a few feet away from the truck's window and leaned down slightly. He tapped on the glass gently with a knuckle. The man inside hesitated. Every instinct in his brain was screaming at him to stomp on the gas and reverse out of there, but curiosity and the fear of causing an accident held him in place. He slowly lowered the window, just an inch. Just enough to hear, "I know this looks terrifying," the driver said. His voice was calm and smooth, like a radio announcer. "I promise you, you are safe. We aren't here to hurt you." The man in the truck stared at him, not saying a word. He kept the flashlight in his lap, hidden from view, but ready. "You've been following me for miles," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "What do you want? Are you the one who helped a woman change a tire last night?" The driver asked, ignoring the question. "Around 8 o'clock? In the pouring rain? A small blue sedan?" The man in the truck blinked. The anger and fear in his chest faltered, replaced by confusion. He narrowed his eyes, looking closely at the stranger. "Yeah, I guess so." "Who was asking?" The driver's face broke into a relieved smile. He let out a long breath and looked back at his partner, who gave a small nod. "Thank goodness," the driver said, turning back to the truck. "It took us all morning to track you down based on the partial plate number and the description of the truck." The confusion only grew deeper. The man in the truck loosened his grip on the flashlight just a fraction. "Track me down? Why?" "Because the woman you helped," the driver explained, reaching into his jacket pocket slowly. The man in the truck flinched, ready for a gun, but the driver only pulled out a thick white envelope. "She is the daughter of the man I work for. He was actually in the car behind her last night. He saw you stop. He wanted to help, but he isn't physically able to get out in the rain like that anymore. He has bad knees and a heart condition." He felt terrible that he couldn't help his own daughter. The man in the truck sat in stunned silence. He remembered seeing another set of headlights in the distance last night, but he had been so focused on the tire and the rain that he hadn't paid any attention to them. "He saw everything," the driver continued. "He saw you get soaking wet. He saw you refusing the money she tried to give you. He was incredibly impressed. He sent me out this morning to find you. He said there aren't many people left in the world who would do what you did without asking for anything in return." The story sounded crazy, but the sincerity in the driver's voice made it feel true. The man in the truck rolled the window down all the way. The rain was gone, but he could still smell the wet pavement and the exhaust from the SUV. "So, you followed me all over town just to say thanks?" "Not just to say thanks," the driver said. He pushed the envelope through the open window. It landed on the passenger seat next to the greasy napkins and the cold coffee. "He insisted you take this. It's not a bribe. It's a reward. He told me to tell you that if you don't take it, you'll insult him." The man in the truck looked at the envelope. It was thick, heavy enough that it had to contain cash, and a lot of it. He felt his face get hot. "I can't take that," he stammered. "I didn't do it for money. I just did it because she needed help." "He knows that," the driver said softly. "That's exactly why he wants you to have it. People who do good things just because they can are rare. He wants to make sure your kindness is rewarded. Besides," he added with a small chuckle, "he can be very stubborn. If you don't take it, he'll just send me to find you again tomorrow." The man in the truck picked up the envelope. It felt crisp and expensive. He looked at the driver, then at the big guy standing by the SUV. For the first time that morning, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a weird sense of disbelief. He had been ready to fight for his life a minute ago, and now he was being handed a reward for a simple good deed. "What's your boss's name?" he asked, just to be sure. "Mr. Vance," the driver said. "You might know the name. He owns the Vance Logistics Company down by the docks." The man in the truck nodded. He knew the name. Everyone in town knew it. They were one of the biggest companies in the city. If this guy was lying, it was a very elaborate lie. But looking at the expensive suit and the calm demeanor, it all started to fit together. "Tell him thank you," the man in the truck said, his voice quiet. "I will," the driver replied. He opened the door to the truck just a little wider and reached out to shake the man's hand. After a moment of hesitation, the man in the truck took it. The driver's grip was firm and warm. "Mr. Vance also wanted me to give you this." The driver reached into his other pocket and pulled out a business card. He handed it over. "If you ever need anything, a job, a favor, or if your truck breaks down again, call that number." The man in the truck looked at the card. It was simple. Black text on white cardstock. Just a name and a phone number. "Safe travels," the driver said. "You too," the man replied. The driver nodded, turned, and walked back to the SUV. The large man opened the door for him, and they both got inside. The window rolled up, and a moment later, the black SUV pulled away smoothly. It drove down the rest of the dead-end street, turned around at the circle, headed back toward the main road. The man in the truck sat there for a long time, alone in the silence. He looked at the envelope in his hand, then at the empty road where the SUV had disappeared. He let out a long breath he felt like he'd been holding since the traffic light. His heart was finally slowing down. He carefully opened the envelope and peeked inside. It was stuffed with $100 bills. More money than he made in 2 months. His hands started shaking a little, but not from fear this time. He thought about his rent, his back pain, and the stack of bills waiting for him at home. He thought about the woman in the rain and the feeling of helping someone without expecting anything back. He closed the envelope and put it safely in his glove box, locking it shut. He started his truck, the engine roaring to life, and put it in drive. He had to get to work, and he was already late. But as he pulled back onto the main road, the weight on his shoulders felt a little lighter. The world felt a little less scary and a little more kind than it had when he woke up that morning. The drive to the hardware store felt different. It was the same route he took every single day, passing the same cracked gas stations and the same empty lots, but everything looked a little brighter. The cash sitting in his glove compartment was like a heavy, warm brick that he could feel even without touching it. For the first time in a long time, the constant knot of worry in his stomach had loosened. He wasn't just thinking about how to survive the month. He was thinking about what he could do. He pulled into the gravel parking lot behind the store and parked his truck between 2 large delivery vans. He sat there for a moment, staring at the steering wheel. It still felt surreal. Less than an hour ago, he was convinced he was being chased by criminals, or maybe even the police. He had prepared himself for a fight, gripping that flashlight until his knuckles turned white. Now he knew he was just being hunted by a wealthy man's gratitude. It was a strange, overwhelming feeling. He felt seen, and in a world that usually ignored people like him, it meant everything. He grabbed his lunchbox and stepped out of the truck. The morning air was crisp, and he took a deep breath, filling his lungs. He locked the truck door and walked around to the back to check the lock on the glove box, just to be safe. It was a habit now. Satisfied, he headed toward the back entrance of the store. When he walked inside, the familiar smell of sawdust, fertilizer, and old metal greeted him. It was a comforting smell, the smell of hard work. The store was quiet, just the hum of the large fans overhead and the sound of a forklift moving pallets in the distance. His boss, a gruff older man who usually had a scowl permanently etched onto his face, was standing at the customer service counter counting money. He looked up when the door opened. "You're late," the boss barked, looking at the clock on the wall. The man usually would have flinched. He usually would have mumbled an apology and hurried to the clock to punch in, feeling small and guilty. But this morning, he didn't flinch. He stood up straight and met his boss's eyes. "I got held up," he said calmly. "I had a bit of a situation on the way here." The boss seemed surprised by the lack of fear. He narrowed his eyes, looking for a sign of weakness, but he didn't find one. "We got a shipment of lumber coming in at 10. I need you on the forklift. And try not to scratch the paint this time." "I'm on it," the man said. He walked over to the time clock and punched his card. Thud. He was officially on the clock. The morning went by in a blur of physical labor. He unloaded boxes, organized shelves, and helped customers find the right screws and bolts. Even though his body was tired from the night before, he felt like he had endless energy. Every time he helped a customer finding a specific drill bit or explaining how to mix paint, he thought about the woman in the rain. He realized that he didn't need a rich man to tell him he was a good person. He felt good just doing his job well. Around lunchtime, he took a break and sat on a crate out back. He opened his lunchbox, a sandwich wrapped in plastic and an apple. While he ate, he pulled out his phone. He stared at the screen for a long time. There were bills he needed to pay, appointments he needed to make. He thought about the business card sitting in the glove box. Mr. Vance. He finished his sandwich and crumpled up the plastic bag. He stood up and walked back into the store, but instead of going back to the lumber aisle, he went to the quiet corner near the garden center. He looked around to make sure no one was watching. Then he pulled the card out of his pocket. He had memorized the number by now, but he wanted to see it again. He took a deep breath and dialed the number on his cell phone. It rang twice before a calm, professional voice answered. "Vance Enterprises, how may I direct your call?" Hi," the man said, suddenly feeling nervous again. I'm looking for the man who was driving the black SUV this morning." "The one who gave me the envelope?" "Please hold," the voice said. Music started playing, soft, classical music. He leaned against the shelf of fertilizer bags, his heart beating a little faster. He felt ridiculous calling so soon, but he had to know. Was this real? Or was this some sort of mistake? After a minute, the line clicked. A different voice came on. It was the driver from the SUV, the man in the suit. "Hello? This is Robert?" "Is Robert. This is the guy from the truck, from the dead-end road." The voice on the other end warmed up immediately. "Ah, the man of the hour. Mr. Vance is actually in his office right now. Hold on 1 second. He would love to speak to you." Before the man could protest, there was a shuffling sound, and then a new voice came on the line. It was older, raspy, but sounded full of energy. "Son, is that you?" The voice boomed. "Yes, sir," the man said, feeling small again, but in a good way this time. I wanted to call and say thank you for the envelope. It's too much, really." "Nonsense," the old man said firmly. "Robert told me you tried to refuse it." "I admire that. A man who works hard and doesn't have his hand out is a rare breed these days. Tell me, did you get to work okay?" "Yes, sir. I'm at work right now." "Good, and tell me, how's your truck running?" "Is it treating you well?" The man hesitated. He looked around the empty store. It's got some issues, sir. The engine is good, but the transmission is slipping. And the tires are bald. I was planning on fixing them. Eventually. Eventually, Mr. Vance repeated. That's a word that gets people in trouble. You don't need to worry about eventually anymore. I'm going to send Robert back out to you. Where are you located? No, really, you don't have to do that, the man stammered. The cash is enough to fix it myself. I just need to save up for the parts. I don't want you to save up, Mr. Vance said. I want you to have a safe vehicle. You were out there in the rain last night helping my daughter? The least I can do is make sure you aren't stuck on the side of the road yourself. Where is the store? The man sighed, knowing he wasn't going to win this argument. He gave the address. Good, Mr. Vance said. I'll have someone there within the hour. And son. Yes, sir? Don't you dare go back to work until you see him. You keep that envelope safe, too. That's for you, not the truck. The man whispered. Thank you. Take care of yourself. The line went dead. The man stood there holding his phone for a moment, staring at the bags of soil. He felt a strange buzzing in his head. Was this actually happening? He walked back to the front of the store just as the back doorbell rang. His boss was yelling at someone about a missing order. The man walked up to him. Hey, boss. What now? His boss snapped, looking up from a clipboard. I have to step out for a minute. Something came up. An emergency. His boss's face turned red. An emergency? We have a truck unloading in the bay. You can't just leave. It'll only be 10 minutes, the man said. And for the first time, he didn't sound like he was asking for permission. He sounded like he was stating a fact. I'll be right back. He didn't wait for an answer. He walked out the front door, his boss staring at his back, with his mouth open. Outside, the black SUV was already pulling into the parking lot. It parked right in front of the store, blocking 3 parking spaces. Robert stepped out, along with a mechanic in a jumpsuit. The man walked down the steps, feeling the eyes of his coworkers watching through the glass windows. He felt a surge of confidence he had never felt before. He wasn't just the guy who fixed shelves anymore. He was the guy who helped a stranger. And today that meant everything. The man watched as the mechanic from the SUV popped the hood of his old truck. He stood off to the side, feeling a mix of embarrassment and amazement. Here he was, in the middle of a workday, while a professional mechanic was checking his engine like it was a race car. Robert, the driver in the suit, leaned against the side of the SUV, checking his watch, looking completely at ease. The mechanic whistled low, shaking his head as he looked at the rusted parts inside the engine bay. You said the transmission is slipping? The mechanic asked, wiping his hands on a rag. The man nodded, stuffing his hands into his pockets. Yeah, it struggles to shift into second gear. And the tires, well, you saw them. The mechanic walked around to the back of the truck and kicked the tire gently. It didn't bounce much. These are bald, my friend. It's a miracle you weren't hydroplaning all over the place in that rain last night. Robert stepped forward then. We're going to tow it to the shop, he said to the man. Mr. Vance wants a full overhaul. New transmission, new tires, the works. He also mentioned the brakes looked a little soft from the window tint, so we're doing those too. You don't have to do all that, the man said, feeling his face get hot. The money in the envelope is more than enough to patch it up. Mr. Vance doesn't do things halfway, Robert said with a smile. Besides, think of it as a safety precaution. You saved his daughter from standing in a dangerous spot. He wants to make sure you're safe on the road, too. It's just good karma. A flatbed tow truck pulled into the parking lot a few minutes later, summoned by a quick call from Robert. As the driver loaded the pickup onto the back, the man realized he was stranded without a ride. I can give you a lift back to work, Robert offered. Opening the passenger door of the SUV, the man hesitated for a split second, looking at the luxury interior of the vehicle, then climbed in. It smelled like new leather and expensive air freshener. It was the smoothest ride he had ever experienced. They drove back to the hardware store entrance in silence, but it wasn't an awkward silence. It was a peaceful moment. When they pulled up, the man saw his boss standing in the open doorway of the store. His boss had his arms crossed over his chest and a look of pure shock on his face as he watched the man step out of the black SUV. "Thanks, Robert," the man said, holding out his hand. Robert shook it firmly. "The truck will be ready in 2 days. I'll bring it back to you myself. Don't worry about a bill. It's all taken care of." Robert drove away, leaving the man standing on the pavement. He took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and walked toward his boss. He expected to get yelled at for taking a break, but his boss just stared at him. "Whose car was that?" his boss asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And why did they take your truck?" "Long story," the man said simply. "Just needed some repairs. I'll be back to work now." He walked past his boss and headed to the lumber aisle, a strange new confidence in his step. The rumors started almost immediately. He could hear the other employees whispering near the paint cans, wondering who he really was or if he had won the lottery. He didn't care. For the rest of the shift, he worked harder than he ever had. He moved heavy pallets with a smile, helped customers carry bags of cement to their cars, and even cleaned up a spill in aisle 4 without being asked. 2 days later, true to his word, Robert pulled into the hardware store parking lot right at closing time. The man's truck looked brand new. The rust was gone from the wheel wells, the paint was polished to a shine, and the tires were thick and black. The engine purred like a kitten instead of roaring like a dying lion. Robert handed him the keys. Mr. Vance also put a small gift box on the passenger seat. "Something for the house," he said. The man got in and saw a small box wrapped in expensive paper. Inside was a beautiful, leather-bound journal and a high-quality pen. There was a note that simply read, "Write your own story. V. He sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel. It felt solid and strong beneath his hands. He turned the key and felt the power of the rebuilt engine. He didn't just have a truck now. He had a reliable way to get to work. He had money in his pocket to pay off his debts. He had a safety net he hadn't had yesterday. That weekend, he did something he hadn't done in years. He drove to the supermarket and filled a shopping cart without looking at the price tags. He bought steaks, fresh vegetables, and a bag of high-quality dog food for the stray dog that lived behind his apartment complex. He drove to the auto parts store and bought a case of oil and some new tools, not because he needed them right then, but because he wanted to be ready. But the biggest change wasn't the stuff he bought. It was the way he looked at the world the following week. He was driving home from work when he saw a car broken down on the side of the road. It was a young man, maybe 20 years old, standing by the open hood, looking helpless and kicking the tires in frustration. The man in the truck slowed down. Old habits tried to kick in: the worry about being late, the fear of getting involved, the desire to just get home. But he looked at the shiny new dashboard of his truck, remembered the rain, and remembered the black SUV. He checked his mirrors and pulled over. The young man looked terrified as the truck approached, ready to run if necessary. But the man just rolled down his window and smiled. "Radiator hose?" he asked, pointing to the steam coming from the engine. The young man blinked, surprised. "I think so. I don't know what to do. I don't have any money for a tow truck." "Don't worry about that," the man said, grabbing his new tools from the passenger seat. "I've got some tape and water in the back. It's a temporary fix, but it'll get you home." As he worked in the fading evening light, the young man kept thanking him, offering the only $5 he had in his wallet. The man just laughed and shook his head. "Keep your money," he said, tightening the clamp. "Just do me a favor." "Anything," the young man promised. "Next time you see someone stuck on the side of the road," the man said, wiping his hands on a rag, "just stop. Even if it's just a call for help. That's all you have to do." The young man looked at him, really looked at him, and nodded. "I will, I promise." The man packed up his tools and got back into his truck. As he drove away, watching the young man successfully restart his car in the rearview mirror, he felt that same warmth in his chest that he had felt the rainy night before. He realized that the money and the truck were amazing gifts, but they weren't the real reward. The real reward was knowing that he was part of a chain now. He had been helped when he was down, and now he had the strength to help someone else. He wasn't just a guy struggling to get by anymore. He was a man who could make a difference. He turned up the radio, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel, and drove toward the city lights, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring.